Welcome to Across the Line. On this Football Friday, we've got Mickey Ingles on the show. He's a practicing attorney here in the Philippines who specializes in sports law and taxation. He's also a professor and author, and today he shares his knowledge with us. We get a chance to touch on some scandals that have plagued Philippine football as of late, as well as the debate between amateurism and pro sports, and what kind of bridge could be made to facilitate sort of players going back and forth between amateur leagues and professional leagues. We also talk about what players need to watch out for when they jump into the pro leagues. I think it was a fantastic conversation. I certainly enjoyed it, and I feel as if it would be a great benefit to individuals who are looking to get themselves into the world of sports, especially here in the Philippines. So without further ado, here is Mickey and Gles. If you enjoy this conversation, please do subscribe to our channel on YouTube, Spotify, and on Apple Podcasts, and look for Across the Line on social media as well. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and on Instagram. Here we go, my conversation with Mickey and Gles. It's not often we get individuals of the law here on Across the Line, but today we've got a special treat because we've got Mickey Ingles on Across the Line today. We don't get an opportunity to talk much about the law, but today we get the chance to focus in on sports law specifically. I'm pretty sure we're not going to talk about taxation on this episode, but we have a man who has plenty of experience specializing in the world of sports law. He is also a professor and author. Mickey, it's a pleasure to meet you. Thank you for taking the time to do this.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me, Jane.
Of course,
it's pretty cool that we'll get to talk about sports law. I love talking about sports law, so it's an honor to be here.
That's awesome because I don't know too much about sports law, so I presume I will be learning a lot on this episode, and everybody who will be tuning in will as well. Now, the reason why you're here on Across the Line, of course, is there's got to be a connection to football, right? It's not just sports law enough to get you on the show. You have to be a passionate football man, and that's exactly what you are. You got quite the collegiate career under your belt. How long have you been a fan of football?
Well, I started playing football when I was, I think, 3 years old or 4 years old. So since then, I've been a super fan of football. Love playing football. I miss playing football. Super miss it because of the pandemic. I haven't been able to play with other people in exactly a year. I think the last time I played was February 2020. And now I'm kind of regretting not playing more because I kind of miss it. So it's like you take it for granted, right? Oh well, it is what it is.
I feel like a lot of people are in that same boat, I'll pass. There's next week and then wala na, right?
Yeah. Wala na, yeah.
But your college career was pretty noteworthy, if that's an understated way of putting it. 3-time champion, 2 of those years you were MVP. You were captain of Ateneo. Did you win any MVPs as well? I'm not sure.
No MVPs. The MVPs were all won by our teammate Patrick Ozaita. So he was our center back, solid center back. Every year that we won the championship, 2 years of the 3 championships, he was the MVP. He should have been the MVP when we won our first, but he was a rookie then, so maybe that they counted that against him. But he was rookie of the year.
So 3 years as champion. Normally, when you have such accolades in the collegiate game, you're thinking about the professional game. But at that time, was there really an option for you to go pro?
No, there was no option at that time. So what happened after college, I moved to China for a year to study Chinese, but I'm not that good at Chinese anymore. I played in a league there called the Shanghai International Football League. It was a pretty high-level league, so I was playing with expats, and it was very competitive that our team, so I was playing with mostly Italians, but they got this recruit from Uruguay who played in the 3rd division in Uruguay. So it was a pretty competitive league.
Oh, wow.
So I played there for 4 or 5 games before I decided to stop playing because the venue was pretty far. When I came back, I started playing in the UFL with Loyola FC. And I played in Loyola FC for 3 or 4 years before it got too busy with I got too busy with law school, and exactly at the point where I was getting super busy with law school, Loyola tied in with Meralco,
Mm.
and so the young husbands came in, and practices were getting too serious. So at that point, I decided to play in the second team of Loyola. At the time, it was called Loyola Aguila, and from there, I played like 2 or 3 more years. But once the PFL started, I wasn't playing anymore. I would just do like alumni league in Ateneo, or just like pick up games, because my schedule just wouldn't allow like real intense practices and schedules anymore.
So when you got into law, what year was this? Shortly after your playing career?
That was I got into law 2008.
Was that always something that you
Yeah.
wanted to do growing up?
Well, it was a default because my dad's a lawyer. So
Mm.
it was something that I knew I would eventually get into. So I graduated Ateneo after our third championship. That was in 2006. I was in Shanghai until 2007. Came back. I tried playing with the Ateneo team again, but I wasn't eligible anymore because I enrolled late. So I was just helping the team out as like a practice player, helping out like a de facto assistant coach. And then I entered law school in 2008. I remember that because in 2000, late 2009, early 2010, that was when the Azkals started like
Yeah.
becoming super popular because of the Suzuki Cup, and more sponsors started coming into the UFL, and things got even more competitive. So that was a fun time because everything was just starting off, and the competition was high, and I could still play in a high competitive level. So those were good years for me.
But these days, it's full attorney work that takes up your time, and being a professor.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so my days are normally, um, I start my day off by doing law work. Like most mornings, occupied by law firm work, representing clients, helping clients out. And then afternoons, that's when I teach in the Ateneo Law School. But now, because of the pandemic, everything's just online. So I'm having challenges like keeping boundaries from switching from law firm work to law professor work, then to my
Mm.
writing, and then family time. But I mean, I've been used to all this, like wearing a lot of hats.
Mm.
So it's been a fun challenge to tackle.
So I reckon you got into sports law because of your sporting background. Is that correct? Is that
Yeah,
safe to assume?
definitely. Yeah, definitely.
So tell me a
Yeah,
little
yeah,
bit
definitely.
about sports law here in the country. Like, what's the landscape like of sports law? Is it something that's established? Is it busy? What's it like here in the Philippines?
Well, we start off with the definition of sports law because a lot of people, when I tell them that I practice sports law, they always say like, "Is that really a thing?
Mm.
What's that about?" I always tell them like sports law is made out of three things. The first is the application of like current laws and legal doctrines to sports. So even if a law does not have anything to do with sports, it can apply to sports. So like contract law, right?
Mhm.
That will apply to professional sports contracts, endorsement deals of athletes. And when I was in law school, one of my thesis for my Juris Doctor degree was actually about sports torts. So my question there was, if you get injured in a football game, can you sue the guy who injured you during the game? So the inspiration for this actually happened to one of my teammates. We had a tryout back in 2005. We were playing San Beda. He was our goalkeeper. There was a loose ball. He picked it up. I think he dove for it, and then one San Beda player continued his run and slide tackled him, even when he was holding the ball. The knee of the San Beda player crashed into his jaw. So his jaw started bleeding. We found out that he broke his jaw in like two or three places. And the question there was, can you sue the guy who did it to you? Under legal doctrines, normally you can't sue the guy during a game because there's this thing called the assumption of risk that if you play a sport, you assume that you're going to get injured because it's part of the game, right? So my thesis tackled answering the question, so when can you sue? And the answer there is it's actually established by American case law. You can sue if that person, the one who injures you, does it intentionally, like someone like punches you during a soccer game, because that's not part of the game. And number two, if the other person's actions are reckless and it violates a safety rule or it disregards your safety. An example for this is what happened in the example I told you. It was reckless because we all know that once a goalkeeper holds the ball, you're no longer allowed to hit the goalkeeper, right?
Right.
And if you do, it's a violation of a safety rule. So if we go back in time and I counsel like the goalkeeper of Ateneo at that time who was trying out, I would tell him, yeah, you can sue the guy who hit you, who broke your job because it wasn't slide tackling a goalkeeper who has control of the ball already. It's not part of football, right?
Mm.
I mean, it's not even allowed by it's a straight red card if you do that. So that's an example of sports law. A second aspect of sports law are sports specific legislation, meaning these are laws crafted by Congress which focus solely on sports. There are two examples I always give. Number one is the Student Athlete Protection Act, which tries to protect student athletes or collegiate student athletes from being overly commercialized. And the other one is the National Athletes, Coaches, Benefits, and Incentives Act, which gives monetary incentives. So, like our SEA Games medalists. It's also the law that grants like national athletes and coaches 20% discounts when they go to restaurants or when they order like Grab food. So they get 20% discount.
What?
Not a lot of people know about it, but
I never knew that.
yeah,
What is this?
so that's the law's been around for a couple of years, but they only started implementing it like seriously um just this year, start of 2020, because some SEA Games athletes, when we talk to them, we always tell them, hey, you should get a 20% discount because you're a national athlete.
Yeah.
And they were saying, what? We've been trying, but every time I go to like a restaurant, they just treat me like I'm crazy because they don't know about it. So we kind of did like a information campaign trying to teach people about it, and media picked it up. And because of media pressure, the BIR finally came out with rules on how to implement the 20% discount. So if you're a national athlete, you get that 20% discount. An example here is like Starbucks actually gives a 20% discount for national athletes as long as you show your national athlete card. The third aspect of sports law, these are the rules and regulations of um, international sports federations like FIFA. So these aren't really laws, but these rules have the force of law when it comes to players, when it comes to coaches. This is a fun aspect of sports law because you're really studying the internal rules and regulations of an international federation. So you're when it comes to this, you'll be talking about FIFA rules, FIFA transfer rules. You'll be talking about doping when it comes to the World Anti-Doping Agency Code. That's sports law in general. The landscape here, though, in the Philippines, it's not that established yet,
Mhm.
as compared to like the US or like in Europe. I've met a lot of lawyers in different jurisdictions where their practice is solely fueled and monetized by sports law. Like in one of the conferences I went to last year in London, I met a I met a Spanish lawyer, and all his law firm does is just do football transfers, right? It's all football, and it's so super interesting because if you look at the FIFA rules, it's like a whole different ball game when it comes to legal stuff. And my dream is to actually have a practice that will survive solely on sports law. But here in the Philippines, it's not a lot of people know about it. Not a lot of athletes know their rights and obligations. Not a lot of stakeholders which involve a lot of money don't know that there are legal aspects when it comes to sports. So my practice mostly is still corporate law, labor law, tax law, but I'm building the sports law. And there are some days where all the things I do are just sports law, which I find really fun. But I want everything to be sports law.
Wow, tremendous. Three things. First and foremost, I want to know: did your friend actually sue the goalkeeper? Did he go through with it, with his case of potentially filing suit with the guy who slide tackled him?
No, I didn't sue.
He didn't.
No, he
Oh,
didn't sue. What
oh.
happened?
Go ahead.
No, he didn't sue. What he did was, I think we complained. We complained to. I'm not sure if they complained to the PFF, but Ateneo decided that if ever that guy, the guy who injured my teammate, comes back to play in Ateneo, we would walk out of the game.
Mm.
So the epilogue there was a few months later, we played San Beda again, and the coach of San Beda decided to put the guy in,
Mm.
and we were leading, I think 1-0 or 2-0. It was like a practice game or something. No, I think it was an official game, but not a UAAP game or NCAA game, like a preseason game. Once they put him in, we just walked out. So that was how we dealt with that situation. Yeah.
That guy got sent off during that match, though, when the incident happened, at least.
Yeah, I think yeah, he got sent off, I think.
Okay.
I think. Yeah.
Secondly, your quote or the trivia that you provided on national athlete discounts has made this episode worth it for any athletes who have tuned in to this episode already. Get your 20%, guys.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Uh,
It's a lot.
the third thing that I wanted to ask was, so if the sports law sort of environment in the Philippines is still somewhat in its infancy, when you do tackle sports cases, what do you find as the most common sort of issues that you face?
Ooh, most common so far are issues of teams of well players with their teams. Like players who are under contract with their teams, and then the teams suddenly decide we don't want you anymore
Mm.
because you no longer fit with the team system. So that's been an issue so far because the whole the whole regime of how you think about a player with his team internationally is that a player is an employee of the team,
Right.
right? And under labor law, if you're an employee of your employer, you have certain rights, and one of these rights is security of tenure. You can only be removed by your team for just or authorized causes. So, what's a just cause? For example, you commit a crime against your employer, you can get fired for that, or habitual neglect of your duty, gross habitual neglect of your duty. So the law enumerates only certain portions or certain reasons why you can get terminated. But there are a lot of players here in the Philippines when it comes to different professional sports. They are just terminated, even if their contract is still existing. And normally, what the teams say is that you are no longer good enough to play for us,
Right.
right? That's always their excuse. The thing is, even FIFA does not allow that because under FIFA, you always have those just causes. And it's not a sporting just cause. Um, if you are no longer, what do you call, if you no longer have the skills that your coach wants you to do, right? Or the talents to have, or you're no longer as fit, right? Or basically, if you no longer play that well, the coach can't remove you from the team, right? There are other options. He can put you on loan or he can transfer your contract, but he can't terminate your contract because
Mm.
that's goes against the law, right? So we have one pending case for that. It's now with the Court of Appeals. It used to be it's a player who got cut by his team. Other issues would be like a team suddenly folding up and then leaving players with contracts that they can't enforce.
Oh,
Right?
that
We
sounds
we saw that.
familiar.
Yeah, it sounds very familiar. So yeah, so we have actually a couple of cases with FIFA on that issue alone. So we're representing two of the players who were given contracts. They signed the contracts. They had the expectation that they were going to come to the Philippines to play for the team, and then things started becoming weird. They were not being paid. They were suddenly being ghosted, and then they were being shuffled around. Like you talk to this person, we're no longer in charge of this one. Blah blah blah. So we filed a couple of cases, not with our local courts. We filed it with FIFA itself because that's allowed under FIFA rules. That's what I was telling you about. That you have to follow the rules of FIFA.
Mm.
And one of the cases we won. Right. The problem here is actually enforcing it because that certain team hasn't even been replying to any of our letters so far. They haven't been replying to the judgment of FIFA, which was telling them you have to pay a certain amount of money. So that's a challenge there. But mostly those are the issues that we deal with. Other issues like endorsement deals, contracts, I do a lot of contract reviews for athletes here in the Philippines and athletes who go abroad, helping them be protected with contracts with their teams or with their agents. It's fun. I like it.
And what do you find as the busiest sport that you deal with? Basketball, volleyball, football,
Right now, basketball.
basketball,
Basketball.
as
Yeah.
expected. But going back to that little situation with the club who did not pay their um, what they promised certain players to who were going to arrive in the country, right? You filed a suit in FIFA, you win this. You filed a case in FIFA, you win that case, and you said you had issues with the enforcement, right? So
Yeah.
at this point, then what avenues do you have to explore, or do you have present for you in order to make sure that a person is compensated the way they should have been?
Well, our options now are bringing the case or at least enforcing the judgment of FIFA in local courts. But of course,
Mm,
that's going to cost money, right?
right.
The thing with our case in FIFA, because it's an employment contract case between an international player with a local team. Under FIFA rules, you don't have to pay any costs if you want to file a case.
Mm,
So there were no costs. We were doing it in a way that our clients would not have to put out or shell out money up front. So there was nothing, I mean, for them to lose, right? But once we start trying to enforce it in local courts, then there will be money out because we'll have to pay filing fees with the local court. So that's the problem that we're trying to wrap ourselves around. Because the thing is, if this local team suddenly just absconds or leaves the country and it no longer has any assets, it's going to be hard for us to start going against the individuals, right, who
yeah.
own the team. So that's the problem there. So yeah, sure, we won in FIFA. It's good because at least it's there in the records that this certain team treats their players this way. But the thing is, it's gonna be well, not really impossible, but it's gonna be there'll be a lot of hard work that we will have to entail or have to do to actually get that money, right?
Right.
So
So
that's a different issue there.
very interesting. So that's going to be a huge like warning for everyone looking to deal with football clubs. You got to make sure that they are
Yeah,
legitimate and they have the capability to fulfill the promises that they've thrown out there. Because everything sounds good when it's out on social media and it's backed with posters and such, but you got to make sure that you
yeah,
do your due diligence. I suppose that's the lesson there.
definitely, yeah, definitely.
Now, you mentioned something earlier about laws that are specific to sport, and you mentioned that there is a student athlete law, protection law. Is that correct? Something about the over
Yeah, yeah.
commercialization of student athletes. Now, this is quite an interesting sort of dynamic, especially with the football landscape, with regards to collegiate athletes looking to dip their toes into the professional stage, right? The
Yeah,
PFL has
yeah.
sort of not matured to a level where collegiate athletes won't have the opportunity to express themselves, if that makes sense. So the level
Hmm.
of quality is still there for them to be able to get lots of benefits from testing themselves and training alongside some of the best athletes out there. But once they dip their toes into to the professional game, there's no going back to their
Yeah,
UAP life,
yeah.
right? Which is extremely unfortunate, especially when you're trying to earn yourself a good education. So what are your thoughts on this sort of dynamic? And is there some sort of middle ground possible to be found here where you could really maximize the benefit of the player's development while at the same time not throwing away a potential good education if things don't pan out in professional sport?
Yeah, well, I understand the struggle there. I understand that some college players really want to play in the PFL because of the high level. And I understand that if they do play there, it's going to be helpful to their teams, their school teams, because their level's just going to get higher.
Hmm.
But I also understand the side of the UAAP, the side of the NCAA, and why they make these certain rules that if you go pro, you're no longer eligible to play in the amateur level and the student athlete level. The thing is, the law, the Student Athlete Protection Act, actually doesn't cover that situation.
Mm,
It actually gives athletic associations like the UAAP, the NCAA, free reign to do whatever they want when it comes to eligibility. So the Student Athlete Protection Act covers just two things, right? Number one, the kinds of benefits that schools can give these athletes when it comes to recruitment. Like you can give them uniforms, you can give them lodging, blah, blah, blah.
Mhm.
The other thing is that it tries to control like athletes, student athletes switching from one school to another by imposing like a maximum of 1 year residency if you switch from one school to another.
Right.
That's all it does. It doesn't say anything about turning pro and its effect on your amateur status. So that's still up to the athletic associations. And like I said a while ago, I understand the dilemma athletic associations are in because again, they want the student athletes to play in a manner which is pure and which is for the school. And the whole thinking of society is once you're given money, it's no longer pure. I mean, that's something that's debatable, right? I mean, doesn't mean that it's no longer pure just because you get money out of it. But it's a situation which is, I mean, we can learn from what they do in the States and what they don't do. Like in the States, they're too strict when it comes to NCAA rules. So there, you can't even get like an endorsement deal, right? So
Mm.
the issues now in the States is because here, like if you're a student athlete, you make your money with your endorsement deals. And
Right.
like some student athletes get more endorsements than the pros. If you're a student athlete in the States, you get an endorsement deal, you're no longer eligible to play for your school. So that was the rule before. But they're trying to open up now in the States, and maybe we can learn from that. Like I remember for NCAA rules, at least when it comes to hockey, um, men's hockey, if you're allowed to get drafted by a pro team, and I think you're allowed to work out with the pro team and still play in the NCAA, not lose your eligibility. So maybe something can be worked out with the UAAP that way. Like if you play in the PFL in the off season, then what stop you should still be allowed to play for them. I mean, for your school team during the what do you call it? During the your off season with the pro league. When I was in UAAP, I think that was the rule.
Mm.
You can play all you want during the off season, but once UAAP starts or once the semester starts, you can't be in the lineup of any commercial team. And I think that's a good balance, right? But again, I mean, it's up to the athletic associations what they want to do.
Right. I believe during the UFL times it was pretty prolific crossover players who would play in the UAAP during the season, and then they would be off the professional roster for the time being, and then they would be re-added onto the roster once the UAAP was over. And
Yeah,
that was a huge benefit. I saw a lot of players who jumped a few levels very, very quickly,
yeah,
and you would see them go back to UAP and look like men against boys. And
yeah,
um, and
yeah,
that's sort of where my personal view or opinion stands. There is that the previous highest level of football was the UAP or the
yeah,
NCAA. But once this new level was opened up, you could see that the discrepancy was a little bit too big, so
yeah,
then, we're losing out on the potentiality of grooming a potential star at 17 or 16 and really giving him that
yeah, definitely.
taste of that
Yeah,
level
definitely.
up so that he could, boost his trajectory. So I'm hoping somewhere down the road that there's going to be some sort of reasonable discourse about this situation and not just about, trying to take advantage of one another in this
Yeah,
regard, and hopefully cooler heads will prevail down the road.
yeah, I agree. There's always middle ground. As long
Yeah.
as you try to be creative in solving the problem, there's always middle ground. Hopefully they find that middle ground.
So when you look at the future of Philippine sports at the moment, you mentioned that the sort of cases and issues that you're dealing with now, do you foresee that changing down the road as sort of sports law becomes a more prevalent subject matter?
Yeah, definitely, definitely. I mean, I always tell people that if you want to improve sports in the Philippines, one of the foundations you have to build on is law, right? Just like with anything. If you want to improve banking in the Philippines or the stock market, securities, if you want to improve a certain industry, you have to make sure the foundation in law is stable. So I think once people start realizing the importance of applying laws in the context of sports and applying it properly, you will have a firm foundation for sports. And if you have a firm foundation for sports in law, then sports can grow. right? Because you no longer have to worry about someone suing you, or you don't have to worry about a contract being defective because it doesn't comply with, for example, with FIFA rules or like FIBA rules. And if you don't have that to worry about that, you can worry about other things like making a business out of sports, right? So hopefully in the future, these little problems, well, it's called, I consider them little now, but they're actually big problems. They're little because it seems so backwards compared to other jurisdictions.
Mm.
For example, here in the Philippines, there's still an issue whether a professional athlete is an employee of his team, right?
What are they
In,
considered
in,
as
in
normally? As third-party
as independent,
contractors? Independent
yeah,
contractors.
contractors,
Right.
yeah, independent contractors, which is I think they're considered this because there's this one case that the Supreme Court decided in, I think, 2003 or 2004, involving Jay Sonza. He's a radio broadcaster. And the Supreme Court said there, because of his talents and because of his high pay, because of his celebrity status, he was not an employee of ABS-CBN. He was an independent contractor. And I think sports industries have used that case to say, look, I'm getting you because you're a football superstar. I'm giving you a high amount of money. I'm using your celebrity status. I'm using your skills and talents. And because I'm doing all of that, I'm going to equate you to an independent contractor. But the problem is, if you read that Sonza case, the Supreme Court actually said that those aspects, those factors which I mentioned, were not conclusive. Were not conclusive indicators to show that a person is an independent contractor. These are merely badges of the relationship. And there are a lot of ways that you can argue against it. For example, if you say that a person is an independent contractor merely because of his unique talents, then a CEO will never be an employee,
Right.
right? Or a president of a company, or a secretary who's super good in like typing, right? And these
Yeah.
are all employees, right? And when it comes to wages, they, people always say, yeah, it's a high wage, therefore you're an independent contractor. It's not the case because like Lionel Messi, he's an employee of FC Barcelona. LeBron James is an employee of the Lakers. They have exorbitant amount of wages, but they're still considered employees of the team. And here in the Philippines, it's still an issue. Some teams, like I advise some teams, and they tell me, yeah, we'll just consider them independent contractors because it'll be easier for us to just let them go because
Mm.
everything will be governed by the contractor, by the contract. And I always tell them, no, that's not the case. And I also tell players, look, you're being treated as an employee, then you should get the benefits of being an employee. What are these benefits? Security of tenure. You can't just get terminated altogether at any time. You have to get SSS benefits, right? Pension. For your pension, you get pag-ibig benefits as well. Um, you have the right to unionize if you want to. But since the players don't know this and the teams don't consider them as professional athletes, I don't consider them as employees, all these rights are taken for granted,
Mm.
right? And it just blows up when a player loses his spot in the team, and
Right.
then he comes up and says, was it a mere termination of a contract because of an independent contractual relationship, or is it illegal termination because an employee, right? And we always say you're an employee based on the contract, based on how they treat you. So that's an issue, which I find it's a big issue here where it should be a small issue because it has been established and what do you call it? Figured out in other jurisdictions. That's the frustrating part.
It kind of seems like it's geared towards the teams, right? It's
Yeah,
the deck is stacked towards the teams so that they don't have to pay
yeah,
for all of this
definitely.
extra stuff, right? So then,
Yeah.
being as a sports law expert as yourself, if you want to move the needle, so to speak, how do you convince clubs and teams that this is actually a beneficial thing to consider your players as employees? What's in it for them?
What's in it for them is that um, they won't face an illegal termination case
Hmm.
because if you treat them as an employee, then the back of your head is, look, I have to treat this person right, right? Because when you're an employee, labor law tilts to your favor, right? So you're going to be protected, and as an employer, you're gonna start protecting the team. And for them, it's gonna hurt them. Well, it's up to them how they want to handle it economically, because that's normally the reason why they don't do it, because they
Right.
say, I don't want to pay for benefits. I don't want to pay for 13th month pay. But the thing is, you have to comply with the law, right? So what we're trying to do now, um, so we have a case now in the Court of Appeals. Hopefully, if it does get elevated to the Supreme Court, hopefully we win that case. Because if we do win that case, it's going to set precedent in the Philippines that if you're a professional athlete, you should be considered an employee of the team, right? There was a case before of a basketball player. Supreme Court already said that he was an employee of the team, right? But still, on the ground, some teams still don't consider their players employees.
Right. In fact, that seems to be more the norm than the
It
opposite,
is. It is. It
unfortunately.
is. Yeah, it
So
is.
perhaps empowering the athletes to understand that maybe they should be pushing for these sort of
Perfect. Yeah,
provisions in their
exactly.
contracts might be a way forward. How are you with following Philippine football at the moment? Are you keeping a close eye on how things are transpiring?
Well, not as much as I wanted. I tried watching some games during the bubble, but my schedule didn't permit it.
Right. Well, it's a good time to be watching football. Prior to that, it was a single camera from the stands and going panning left to right. It made for very difficult viewing. But during the bubble, there was a lot of excitement around Philippine football because not
Yeah,
only were they able to pull it off in the bubble, but also that
yeah,
the broadcast had improved dramatically. But there were only 6 teams, of course, and there was
yeah,
only 5 games played per team. So it wasn't a huge season, but it was a success nonetheless because of all the hurdles that needed to be overcome. But now moving
yeah.
on to the next season, it seems there's some rumblings that your former club might be coming back into
Oh, really? Oh,
into the
really?
fore. Yeah, Loyola put out a little bit of a teaser on their social media saying that
Oh, really?
there might be a return. I think other clubs have also signaled their intent to come back, and it looks as if Philippine football is getting a bit of a second life, a second wind, so to
Wow. Wow.
speak. Um,
I'll contact Loyola. Ask them if they need a unfit right winger.
you never know, right? You never know. James' young husband is retired, so you don't have to worry about
Yeah,
him taking your spot.
yeah,
But yeah, what do you think about Philippine football? Obviously, you were there when things were just on the up, right?
yeah,
2010, 2009. Um, what I like to talk about prior to the explosion of the Suzuki Cup was that football was kind of in a dark age. I mean, for the
yeah,
people who played it, you knew the people who played it as well. It
yeah,
was a familiar community, but in the mainstream, it was very, very anonymous, right, to a lot of
yeah,
people. But after Suzuki Cup, things started exploding. So when you were in the UFL, that was very exciting times. Like you
yeah,
could see that from 10 people in the stands to like, ooh, there's like 150. Like, whoa, what's happening here? Right?
yeah,
There's 200.
yeah,
If you got lucky, there was like 1,000 people there, and you lost your mind. Like, oh my God, football is here. It's
yeah.
finally arrived. But then, sort of, it kind of went on a downturn a little bit
It
from
did.
its
Yeah.
heights, and then it kind of lost its momentum. And I'd like to think optimistically that it's kind of moving back up. But how do you foresee sort of the how things have evolved in the landscape of Philippine football, and also like what do you think is going to happen down the road, like 5, 10 years from now?
Well, for me, I think the challenge ever since was sustainability. Because like I think everyone knows that one of the faults that we have as Filipinos, or maybe just like humans in general, is that we push a lot during the start because we're all inspired, right? Because it's exciting, it's new, and then we just lose our momentum going forward. And I think that's what happened. Exactly what you said. We got super hyped up because of the Suzuki Cup, and then sponsors started coming in, people started watching, and then it kind of dipped because it wasn't as sustainable. Um, so hopefully, though, in the future, it does become sustainable. I'm not sure how that will be. I think a lot of it has to do with the success of the national team
Hmm.
and how like the professional teams market themselves. I'm not sure how you're gonna do this because I'm not a marketing expert, but like I heard like in Serie B, they they did this thing that they really got the fans engaged, and that the social media engagement of the fans in Serie B was even more than Serie A.
Hmm.
And I'm not sure how they did it, but I think if you start getting people more involved with it, like the casual sport observer, and I think it's going to be more sustainable, right?
Right.
And if it's more sustainable, maybe 5 to 10 years, it's going to be an upward swing. But I think what's key here is that the investors stay in for the long term,
Right.
right? Because I think that's the problem. A lot of teams just fold up, right? Because the investors aren't making money anymore for whatever reason. So I'm hoping the investors stay and see this as a long term thing. Maybe not necessarily to like earn a lot of profits, but maybe an altruistic reason to help Philippine football. Hopefully, that's one of the things. Maybe we can get like Abramovich to come buy a team, right, and help us form like another Chelsea here or something. But I don't
No.
know.
Kawawa naman yung mga ibang teams. They
Wala na,
wouldn't,
wala na.
they wouldn't
Wala
be
pa naman
able to
tayong salary
compete.
cap, diba?
Exactly. No, that's quite interesting that you mentioned that the success of the national team has been so intertwined with sort of the popularity of the sport as well. And I think um,
Yeah,
a lot of the efforts over the last 4 or 5 years has been sort of trying to capture that same lightning and put it back in the bottle, but it already
yeah,
escaped. So
yeah,
it's like we need
yeah,
to
yeah.
make it. We need to succeed more. Let's pour more money into the national team. But we made it to the Asian Cup, and it did not translate automatically into people
True,
being
true.
crazy about football again. So
Yeah,
I think it might have to be a little bit, as you said about the Serie B, is more of like learning how to engage
yeah,
fans, and maybe not even fans to begin with, strangers, and getting them onto
yeah,
football, and
yeah,
perhaps
yeah,
developing the system of creating strangers into casuals, casuals into
yeah.
supporters, and supporters into fanatics, right? Something of
Yeah,
this
I
nature.
agree. I
Um,
think what happened with the Asia Cup is that Asian Cup is like we didn't do that well there,
True.
and it was like a big pond, right? But for a casual observer, you want success even if it's in a small pond. So what happened in Suzuki Cup, right? It's a small pond. We did well, and we've been doing well in the ASEAN region. So people say, "Oh, the Philippines is winning. Ang galing
Mm,
natin mag-football, ganyan ganyan." And then you bring us to the Asian Cup, and then you start seeing that we're not at par with other teams. And then the casual observer would say, "Ah, mahina pala, hindi pala magaling. Why, ba't pa natin sinusuportahan?"
right.
Right? So maybe it's because they don't understand the magnitude of the Asian Cup, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe I think that that kind of plays with the psychology of the support as well.
I always had this feeling that until the casuals understand like how difficult it is to ping a ball 40 yards, or how to pass to
yeah,
get out of a tight
yeah,
space when you're covered by
yeah,
three defenders and you manage
yeah,
to find a teammate. Until they start
yeah,
to appreciate those things, it's going to be hard to get them when we're not
yeah.
succeeding, right?
I remember in 2000, 2009, 2010, when football was started. I mean, started getting televised because of the Suzuki Cup. Some games of the Azkals were being televised, and the commentators, like, I don't think they knew the sport that much. All they wanted to comment on was the long throws of Anton Del Rosario.
Oh my
And as
god.
like a football player, it's like, can we stop with the long throw commentary? Right? It's a long throw. Good for
Yeah.
Anton that he can do it.
Yeah.
But that's not all there is, right? I mean, look at the midfielders, how they turn, look for space. Let's comment on that, right?
Yeah.
Not on the
Exactly.
long throw. So that was really frustrating as a football player at that time.
Yeah, but I feel for the commentators as well. It's such a difficult spot to be in when there's like you're being told by your producers, nobody knows anything about
True,
football. Try to explain
true, true.
everything, and then
Yeah,
obviously the people who already know football, they're shouting at their TVs, right? Like,
yeah,
so it's a tough
yeah. It's a
balance
hard
there.
spot. It's a hard spot. Yeah,
Listen, I appreciate you, Mickey, coming on and sharing 45 minutes of your time with me, and sort of inoculating me into the world of sports law, and just giving us a bit of a taste, all the listeners of Across the Line as well. I truly believe that this would be a huge benefit to players, just to shape a mindset, so to speak, with regards to how they approach their contracts, how they approach clubs, and sort of just looking out for themselves. Because
yeah.
I really do feel sorry for some of these players who dedicate their lives to the sport and walk away with nothing, because they get screwed over by
Definitely.
their employers. So I appreciate you coming on, and hopefully we'll get a chance to speak with you maybe in the future if something interesting happens some sort of issue that we need some sports law expertise, hopefully you'll pick up my call.
Sure.
I
Definitely. I'm
appreciate.
game for that. I'm game for that.
Thank you so much. And anybody who is into your books should definitely check it out as well. Do you mind like throwing out where people can find you and sort of, I didn't get a chance to really speak about your writing as well. You're an author. So please do share with our listeners here and across the line.
Yeah, so if you're interested in sports law, we have a blog called Bata Sportiva. It's on batasportiva.com. We tackle and write about all sorts of sports law issues there, and it's completely free. I also wrote a book called Laws for Sports and the Sporty. You can find that online on Rex, the Rex bookstore or Rex Online. So Rex is a textbook manufacturer. So Laws for Sports and the Sporty. It's a good overview of sports law in the Philippines, and it's not written for lawyers. It's written actually for the casual fan or
Thank
an
God.
athlete. Yeah, no legalese. It's there are a lot of jokes there. There's even like drawings and stuff. So you can find that Laws for Sports and the Sporty. It's a. I'll send you a copy. Send me your address. I'll send you a
Oh,
copy.
that would be amazing. I was just about
Yeah,
to, I was writing down the website. I was going to go pick up the book anyway, but I'd appreciate that. I'll definitely send you my
yeah,
details.
perfect.
But yeah,
Yeah, and then if anyone wants to know more, they can follow me on Twitter or Instagram, Facebook. It's at Mickey Ingles Law.
right. And it's not just all nonfiction stuff too. You've been putting out some fiction yourself.
Yeah, I recently published a book called Alinam. It's a young adult novel. People describe it as it's like a Harry Potter meets Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman, but set in colonial Manila. So if you're into that stuff, it's a fun read. I
Awesome.
like writing it. Yeah.
Man, like okay, as if sports law is not enough, and running your law firm and teaching and writing, man, you're doing a little bit of everything. I love it. Thank you so much for coming on across the line. For the folks that appreciated this conversation, please do consider subscribing to the show on YouTube, Spotify, and on Apple Podcasts. Find us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and on Instagram. And that is it for this Football Friday. Mickey Ingles. Next week, we will have somebody new. So join us for that one on the next Football Friday. Thank you for watching.